scar, we're calling it. And went right after the show yesterday. And it kind of hurts to put lidocaine into an open wound. Kind of. Stung a little bit. But I play hurt when necessary. Happy to play hurt. Now, the big story of the day needs to be seriously considered right away. And it's not the Israeli elections, although the headline in the Times of Israel, results aren't even official, but already nightmare third election scenario looms. Yep. I told you it's a Rubik's Cube. I don't know how anyone gets out of this because Netanyahu has got to insisting on being prime minister. Gantz is saying he can't be. Lieberman won't be in a government with the Arab list, which is the only way to get Gantz to 61. And if Lieberman won't go in with the ultra-Orthodox, so it's a insoluble Rubik's Cube. So third election, but this is the most important story. From the Los Angeles Times, haven't said that in a long time. The most important story of the day from the Los Angeles Times. U.S. military to present several options to Trump on Iran. It's the AP story, actually, that came out at 2:38 this morning. The Pentagon will present a broad range of military options to President Trump on Friday, that would be today for the Steelers fans, as he considers how to respond to what administration officials say was an unprecedented Iranian attack on Saudi Arabia's oil industry. In a White House meeting, the president will be presented with a list of potential airstrike targets inside Iran, among other possible responses. And he will also be warned that military action against the Islamic Republic could escalate into war, according to U.S. officials familiar with the discussions who spoke on the condition of anonymity. The national security meeting will be likely the first opportunity for a decision on how the U.S. should respond to the attack on a key Middle East ally. Any decision may depend on what kind of evidence the U.S. and Saudi investigators are able to provide, proving that the cruise missiles and drone strikes were launched by Iran, as a number of officials, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, have asserted. Iran has denied involvement and warned the U.S. that any attack will spark an all-out war with immediate retaliation from Tehran. Sound like Hitler in the 30s? Yeah. When he reoccupied the Ruhr Valley in 1934? When he swallowed Czechoslovakia, when the Anschluss with Austria was decided. Time and time again, he threatened, if you do anything, I'll go to all-out war. And then he went to all-out war in 38 anyway. 80 years ago, he went to all-out war. 39, excuse me. And I'm telling you right now, their threats don't matter to the president's calculations, or they ought not to. If they get in a shooting match with the West, they're finished. And it doesn't require invading armies. It doesn't. Now, there will be Hezbollah attacks on Israel, so Israel has to be put on alert. There will be terrorist cell attacks wherever Hezbollah has sleeper cells. They arrested a guy in New York yesterday who was scouting out locations. So it begins. But this is what the Iranians have been attempting to provoke for 40 years. A stand down of the West in the face of their provocations. Can't happen. Both Pompeo and Vice President Mike Pence have condemned the attack on Saudi oil facilities as an act of war. Pence said Trump will, quote, review the facts and make a decision about next steps. But the American people can be confident that the United States is going to defend our interests in the region. We're going to stand with our allies, said Pence. The U.S. response could involve military, political, and economic actions, and the military options could range from no action at all to airstrikes or less visible moves such as cyber attacks. One likely move would be the U.S. to provide additional military support to help Saudi Arabia defend itself from attacks from the north, since most of its defenses have focused on threats from the Houthis in Yemen to the south. General Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, emphasized to a small number of journalists traveling with him Monday that the question of whether the U.S. responds is a political judgment, not for the military. It is my job to provide military options to the president, said Dunford, should he decide to respond with military force. Trump will want a full range of options, he said. In the Middle East, of course, we have military forces there, and we do a lot of planning, and we have a lot of options. In his new book, Call Sign Chaos, General Mattis said of his time at CENTCOM, it was devoted to preparing a rucksack of options vis-a-vis Iran. So this is, I'm sure they're just being updated. We got lots of targeting plans, lots of abilities to hit. U.S. Representative Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan said in an interview Thursday that if Trump chooses an option that involves a significant military strike on Iran, that given the current climate between U.S. and Iran, there's a possibility it could escalate into a medium to a large-scale war. I believe the president should come to Congress. She's wrong. Slotkin, a former top Middle East policy advisor for the Pentagon, said she hopes Trump considers a broad range of options, including the most basic choice, which would be to place more forces and more defensive military equipment in and around Saudi Arabia to help increase security. What a surprise, an Obama official in favor of appeasement. A forensic team from the U.S. Central Command is poring over evidence from cruise missiles and drone debris. But the Pentagon said the assessment is not finished. Officials are trying to determine if they can get navigational information from the debris, which could provide hard evidence that the strikes came from Iran. Pentagon spokesman Jonathan Hoffman said Thursday that the U.S. has a high level of confidence that the officials will be able to accurately determine exactly who launched the attacks last weekend. U.S. officials were unwilling to predict what kind of response Trump will choose. In June, after Iran shot down an American surveillance drone, Trump initially endorsed a retaliatory military strike, then abruptly called it off because he said it would have killed dozens of Iranians. The decision underscores the president's long-held reluctance to embroil the country in another war in the Middle East. Instead, Trump opted to have U.S. military cyber forces carry out a strike against military computer systems used by Iran's Revolutionary Guard to control rocket and missile launchers, according to U.S. officials. The Pentagon said the U.S. is working with Saudi Arabia to find ways to provide more protection for the northern part of the country. Air Force Colonel Pat Ryder, spokesman for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, told Pentagon reporters Wednesday that U.S. Central Command is talking with the Saudis about ways to mitigate future attacks. He would not speculate on what types of support could be provided. Other U.S. officials have said adding Patriot missile batteries and enhanced radar systems could be options, but no decisions have been made. This isn't about what you think. It's not about what I think. It is about what the president decides, and it is what the Iranians will think of the choice made by the president. Do they get a ticket out of jail? They get a do not pass go straight to jail card from the chance file? What is it? Whatever it is, they will respond exactly as they have in the past. Now, in 1988, Ronald Reagan launched Operation Praying Mantis and sunk a half to two-thirds of the Iranian fleet in one day. One day. And then they did nothing for 30 years. They said, oh, really weren't counting on that. Really, we're not counting on that. So there's a critical mission coming today. 1-800-520-1234. What do you want the president to do? 1-800-520-1234. I'll be joined this hour by Representative Michael Waltz. Next hour by Representative Mike Gallagher and North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis. I'll ask people. Both of those are on armed services. Michael Waltz, very smart on that. Army guy, national security matters. All three of those know Robert O'Brien, by the way, the new national security advisor. He's going to go to his first big meeting today. That's going to be quite a meeting. Mike Pompeo will walk in, congratulate O'Brien, whom he pushed for the job, and then say, Mr. President, here are your 10 options. And I hope one of them is hit Carg Island. You can't miss it. Our F-22s are on their way to the region already, and some of them are there. And you might even give them notice. You might even say you got 24 hours to get everybody off Carg Island because we're coming in. And just leave it in ruins. That's their oil production transport central facility. There are two. You can also hit their big power generators. You don't hit their nukes. That's an escalation. But retaliatory response that is proportionate in kind would destroy their oil export and production facilities. Exactly what the Iranians did to the Saudis. And you would let them know. You do anything in response, you're threatening us. We're not going to threaten you. We're just going to tell you, you do anything in response, expect what you least expect. Stay tuned, America. 1-800-520-1234. What should the president decide in the meeting today? It is the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Passing trains that have no name, and freight yards full of old black men, and the graveyards of the rusted automobiles. Good morning, America, how are you?
Good morning, America. It's Hugh Hewitt inside the ReliefFactor.com studio. Great to have you with us on this Friday. It is indeed Friday, and it's a big day. It's a big day because this is the day the president's going to decide what to do about Iran. It is the 20th of September, 2019, and I ask you, I just read you the AP story, courtesy of the LA Times, about the fact there's going to be a meeting today at the White House. The president and all of his advisors, Secretary Pompeo was coming back from the region yesterday, Joe Dunford coming back from the region. He's going to get a list. He's going to check it twice, going to find out that the Iranians have been naughty. How do we make nice or not? What do you think? Sandy, Detroit, Michigan, South Michigan. How are you, Sandy?
I'm well, thank you. How are you today?
Good. What do you think we ought to do?
Well, this discussion about going kinetic seems to be entirely out of line in my thought. It seems passing strange to me that we have allies that continue to trade with Iran. And I would say, until we say anyone who trades with Iran cannot trade with the U.S., we're not being serious. The rest of the ideas about launching tomahawks, that might give us a sort of testosterone boost, but it doesn't really accomplish the mission.
That's not about testosterone, but it's about deterring Iran. But I hear you. I would like all the Europeans to get with us as well. But if they're not, you still don't not deter Hitler in the 30s because Russia has done a deal with them. That's what I sent everyone back to the 30s. Thank you, Sandy. Let's go to Dennis in Lafayette, Indiana. Dennis, what do you think?
Well, I have a tendency to agree with the previous caller. I think that it's actually a Saudi problem, and they've got the capabilities to react to it if that's what they want to do. It's obvious that if we hit them, it's going to escalate, and it's going to get really
No, that's not
ugly.
obvious. That's not obvious, Dennis. Do you know Operation Praying Mantis? We sunk a half of their Navy in one day. They did not escalate. They went back into their hidey holes for 30 years. They cannot match the U.S. with power production. They can't get into that shooting kind of match.
Yeah, this is different. You've got three governments in Iran. You've got the Iranian government.
I know all about that.
Guard,
but eventually it comes down to the supreme leader. That's who decides this stuff. And he's 80 years old and will kill him if he does anything more. I really do think that's the case. It's like killing Hitler. Thank you, friend. Kathy in Scranton, Pennsylvania. What do you think, Kathy?
Yes. I believe that our president ought to show strength, just like Reagan did. And I think that he ought to take out their military installations.
Well, there are like 1,000 of those. That's a full-scale war. He doesn't need to do a full-scale war. They took out a Saudi oil production facility, their largest one. I believe the Iranian largest oil production facility is on Karg Island. Certainly it is their largest export facility. That's what I think I know enough about to say that's tit for tat. Thank you. Jim in Portland, Oregon. You're up early, Jim.
Yeah, I would hope that the president would consider using mines to mine the Iranian waters and ports, and I bet Admiral Stavridis would know a lot more about this.
I wish he was
would.
coming on today, but we're at sea because the Admiral's not here. Pardon the pun.
Yeah,
he's not here today. He's abroad. I can't talk to him today.
It would would have a great psychological effect, and things don't have to go kinetic if their ships.
Well, mining is kinetic. Thank you, my friend, but mining is kinetic. Kinetic is a word that I hesitate to use. It's a military term. I'm just a civilian, but that's force. One more call. Patrick, Texas. What do you say, Patrick?
Oh, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here, but you got to hurry.
Yeah, we need some proof, man. We've already walked off into the Middle East once, 20 years ago. We don't need to do that again without real proof.
Well, that is obviously a prerequisite of doing this, and I believe that they will be presenting enough proof. I saw a huge video yesterday of the debris of the cruise missiles, and I'm quite certain that we've got stuff that no one is talking about, including electronic intercepts of the IRGC talking to each other. Hey, Patrick, thank you. No proof, no strike. I agree with you, but I think we got proof. Don't go anywhere, America. Congressman Michael Waltz joins me next. Great voice for seriousness and national security policy from the Congress, represents Florida. He's joining me next after the break. Stay tuned.
This portion of the Hugh Hewitt Show has been brought to you by MyPillow. Call 800-951-5493 or go to MyPillow.com and be sure to use a promo code HUGH.
Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Because the president is having this special meeting on Iran today, I wanted to talk to three people from the Congress who know about this stuff. Mike Gallagher is joining me next hour. Thom Tillis joining me next hour. Right now, I'm pleased to welcome Congressman Michael Waltz. He is from the 6th Congressional District in Florida. It's spelled Waltz. He's a freshman, but he's also a retired colonel in the United States Army, a veteran of Special Forces, a veteran of the Afghan War. He's also a graduate of VMI, which is usually we get the West Point people who show up, not the George Marshall friends. Good morning, Congressman. Great to have you.
Hey, good morning. And just one small point there, still serving. Still,
are you in the reserves?
Years in and still serving in the reserves. Absolutely. Just jumped out of a perfectly good airplane just a few months ago.
You know, I've never understood that. I've heard a lot of people, pilots are what run in my side of the family, and they say they simply do not understand you folks. But congratulations on being elected to the House. It must be a little bit different from working with the coherent combined arms of the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force to go into the Congress where nothing combines.
Well, you know, Green Berets, we specialize in unconventional warfare and psychological operations, and some days it kind of feels like that.
So you're running around with my buddy.
It's an honor. It's an honor to be. I literally have fought all over the world defending this democracy, and to be a part of it, as imperfect as it is, it's the best system in the world. But man, some days it is tough.
So I got to ask you before we get to the serious stuff. Since you're a VMI guy, do you root for Army or Navy when they play each other? I hope it's Navy. I mean, that's a West Point team. You can't really be cheering for them, right?
That's okay. We just call West Point the VMI of the North. And but at the end of the day, go Army.
Go Army. Well, you're wrong about that. We'll come back to that later. Let's talk for a second about the new National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. He's going to be in a big meeting today, which we'll talk about next. A meeting that the AP describes as the president will be given a list by Joe Dunford of options.
Right.
And then they're going to have a discussion. O'Brien will be there. What is he going to get out of O'Brien? What do you think of the O'Brien appointment?
Well, I think it's a great pick on the part of the president. I know Robert personally, but also have worked with him in his role as hostage envoy. Unfortunately, Florida has a number of hostages held around the world, American citizens, including the Levinsons, the FBI agent that had disappeared in Iran so many years ago. And the great thing about his background and experience is that, one, that's a global issue, Americans being detained by rogue regime and terrorist organizations all over the world. Number two, you're dealing with the entire interagency, law enforcement, State Department, military, of course, as you're trying to get Americans home from these difficult situations. And then three, I think he really has the temperament for this job. And what I mean by that is, you, as National Security Advisor, and by the way, I worked for Vice President Cheney as his counterterrorism advisor, so I've seen these meetings dozens and dozens of times where you're teeing up decisions to the president. That's the key role of the National Security.
On the Salem Radio Network, returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The show returns from break in 5 seconds.
This is is Forever America, Sonny Bunch's music from now on. Because people wait with great anticipation. They applaud when he's done. And he's here to talk about the question on everyone's mind. When will Maggie Smith and Sylvester Stallone find the vehicle in which they can work together? Hello, Sonny.
Downton Rambo.
Good work.
That could be good. You know, Rambo is he goes off to England to kind of make his PTSD better, but he comes across some British thugs who threaten the sacrosanct nature of Downton Abbey.
And the Dowager. Yeah, she's got
to defend the Dowager from these thugs and punks.
I think it could work.
Yeah, that could work.
Which one are you reviewing today, Downton or Last Blood?
Well, so they did not screen Rambo Last Blood.
Ooh, bad sign.
Which is not a great sign. That being said, I get the sense that they did not screen it for critics for the same reason they did not screen Clint Eastwood's The Mule for critics. Remember The Mule? That came out at the end of last year. Right. It was actually so they didn't screen it for critics, so I assumed it was bad. It's not bad. It's fine. It's good. It's as good as a lot of the kind of late stage Clint Eastwood is, anyway. If that's your cup of tea. But I got the sense they didn't screen it for critics because they were worried that critics would call it racist because it has to do with Mexican gangs. And I get the sense that there is something similar at work here with Rambo. Now, Rambo screened for some critics. It did not screen for DC critics. It's not doing well on Rotten Tomatoes from the few who did see it. I will see it this weekend at some point and report back next week because there's nothing coming out next weekend. This weekend has 3 big movies. This weekend has 3 wide releases. Rambo Last Blood, Downton Abbey, which we will discuss momentarily, and Ad Astra, which I did see and is...
Save it for next week. I haven't seen it yet. So we'll do Rambo and Ad Astra last week. What about Downton Abbey? I know what I think. I saw it. What do you think?
Sure. So Downton Abbey is it's not really a 2-hour episode of Downton Abbey. It's more like a season of Downton Abbey condensed into 2 hours. There are all these little subplots. So the king and the queen are coming to Downton Abbey. They have to, the people who live there have to throw a big party. And it's all about, the various class resentments and the workers and the servants in the house are put off by the fact that the king and queen servants want to take over the show and do everything their own way, blah, blah, blah. There's an assassination subplot for some reason that takes up about 5 minutes of screen time. It doesn't make any sense. Here's the thing, Hugh. I'm just going to lay it out there. I was bored by this movie, but that's because I haven't seen a single episode of Downton Abbey.
You're not qualified.
I am not the target audience here, but I did take my wife to go see it. Now, my wife has seen every episode of Downton Abbey, and she loves the show, and she was enraptured by this picture.
That's right. The Fetching Mrs. Hewitt went for the second time last night. I saw it last weekend, and she saw it with her girlfriends last night. So I think this is going to make a lot of money.
I think it's going to be a pretty big... It's going to be one of these movies that everyone says, it's so surprising that this movie is doing well. Well, it's not that surprising. I mean, the show had a decent audience, and it is one of those rare movies that appeals to adult women without being silly or over the top like some of the kind of girl gross out pictures of recent years, like Girls Trip or Hustlers or whatever. Look, it is not for me. It is not the movie for me, Hugh.
I'm an Anglophile, so I love that. Have you ever been to a tattoo, a royal gathering with the Queen present? They're wonderful, and this is just a 2-hour tattoo, and you can't have everything is predictable, right? There's not a single surprise in this movie.
Yeah, no, there were no surprises.
No surprises.
Even I will say, even as somebody who has never watched an episode of the show, I could tell where pretty much everything was headed as things were going along.
Oh, you bet. It's a toasted cheese sandwich on a Saturday afternoon. It's exactly what you need when you need it.
I guess.
Do you think there's another one coming? I think they left it exactly poised for another one to come.
I mean, I don't think you would have to have another one, but I don't see any reason why you had to have this one. So if this movie makes, $150 million in the States, which it very well might, I don't see any reason why there wouldn't be another one.
That's my bottom line is they're going to print money on this. Watch this over the weekend when and there's applause from the lady folk in the movie. Applause. So,
yeah.
You know, I got to ask you, have you seen Peanut Butter Falcon yet, which I saw this week?
No. Did you like it?
I gave it a good solid C+. A lot of people love the heck out of it, but it's so absolutely predictable and not a surprise at all, and a lot of clunky transitions, and it's so unbelievable that I just couldn't give it more than a C+.
I have stayed away from it solely based on the name, just on principle. The ridiculous name of that movie is making me stay away from it.
You probably don't like professional wrestling then, do you? That's why.
No, not my cup of tea.
Yep, that's why. Sunny Bunch on Twitter at Sunny Bunch, giving a qualified thumbs up for you Downton Abbey fans to go out there. It'll be like the Game of Thrones movie when it comes out, like the Deadwood movie when it comes out. They're going to make bank. But Rambo Last Blood, we'll find out next week along with Ad Astra. Don't go anywhere, America. Hour number 2 of the Friday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show, straight ahead.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Citizens for Truth in Drug Pricing.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greeting. It's a Friday, September 20th, 2019. I'm inside the Beltway in the ReliefFactor.com studio. It's a long, hot week in D.C., and it's not going to get any cooler because MSNBC put on a climate change marathon, and it was deadly. Oh, my goodness. You cannot bore people more than a climate change marathon. It's virtue signaling to each other that you do it. And I bet you they did not get enough for, Women Behind Bars or whatever that old prison show was that MSN. It probably got fewer voters than viewers than my show did. I thought I had the lowest rated show until Donnie Deutsch came along in the history of MSNBC. I think Donnie got it. But mine was on at 8 a.m. in the morning on Saturday. So I don't feel bad about that. I just don't know about doing this in prime time. Here's a little clip putting the audience members to sleep during Michael Bennett's portion of the climate change marathon. You know who Michael Bennett is? He's a senator, really is, from Colorado, cut number 3.
152 is greatly diminished that you're asking people to work for if it just is like, well, sorry, we can't get 60 votes, so no climate change
well,
for
you can't. Yeah, that assumes a world where where you never have anybody on the other side who's anything but a climate denier.
That's the world we live in.
That is the world we live in today.
If you're watching on Univision, a girl nodded off, really, literally nodded off in the course of that. So if it's deadly for the studio audience, you can hear the channel changing. Michael Bennett, though, was not giving up. He was talking about winter sports athletes are begging him to do something to protect winter. Cut number 2.
There's an incredible group of sportsmen and women called Protect Our Winners, POW. And
really? Protect Our Winners?
Protect Our Winners, POW. They're some of the most amazing climate advocates in the country. And for them, it's not just about, it's not some metaphysical idea out there. It is their avocation, it is their vocation, it is their livelihood, it is their culture, it's everything, it's their lives. And they are incredible advocates. And the others that you talk about, this is how a democracy is supposed to work.
Actually, no. A democracy is supposed to work through the representatives you send to Congress who haven't done anything. And I remind everyone, the President of the United States was Barack Obama, the Speaker of the United States was Nancy Pelosi, and the Majority Leader of the United States Senate was Harry Reid with 60 votes. And they didn't do anything about climate or guns. Right? They had super majorities in both the House and the Senate, and they didn't do anything about climate, and they didn't do anything about guns. It's a talking point. I was really surprised to see Justin Trudeau show up at the MSNBC Climate Fest. Play clip number 6, please.
What I did hurt them, hurt people who shouldn't have to face intolerance and discrimination because of their identity. This is something that I deeply, deeply regret.
I'm sorry, that's not the Climate Fest. That's just Justin Trudeau apologizing again for wearing blackface. That was before the third blackface video came out. Now, I have my Canadian audience. I doubt very much they're Trudeauians, but it's something. I don't know if that wears off before the election in a month. I'll have to consult my Canadian in-law Russ to find out whether or not Canadians have long memories and they hold grudges. I don't think they do. I think they're too nice.
Take off, you loser.
No, I think they won't say that to Justin. They'll accept his groveling. I'm not. Let's go back to the Climate Fest because some of you may want to go back to sleep on a Friday morning. Andrew Yang, cut number 7.
Oh, this is a challenge that companies in every industry face at various points. I mean, you can see companies that are investing in products that they know are going to displace them. So will these companies manage to evolve with the times? I hope so. I do. And they're among the best situated to make some of the investments that we need for the future. Do I think that we're going to be burning fossil fuels at gas stations in the same way we do now in 2050? I really hope we do not. I hope that that's a charging station. I hope that you only have to use it every so often, and that we're in clean cars. We might not even own our cars at that point. I mean, these business models are going to change a lot. And as a country, we cannot get stuck saying that
we're not even going to own our cars then. Now, that which one said while dozing cannot be held against you. Maybe he meant we won't, so many of us won't own cars because people who live in cities don't need to own cars anyway. And we're becoming an increasingly urbanized country, but you never know. He went on to tell you that you're going to modernize your diet. Actually, the government's going to modernize your diet. Andrew Yang sneaking in another radical, happy-sounding thing that just doesn't make a lick of sense. Cut number 8.
Now, cattle is very energy-consuming and energy expensive. And if you project forward on what we would need to do to reduce emissions, you would want to modify Americans' diets over time. Now, some of that is happening naturally through education. I do think it's difficult to regulate diets. So what you would want to do, again, is you'd want those cattle producers to have to internalize the cost of emissions. Because if your cattle ends up polluting a lot, which they do just naturally, we don't hate them for it. I mean, they're just big animals.
There you go, cow
Don't
farts.
hate the cattle, hate them.
All right, cow farts. They can't stay away from it. Democrats are drawn to cow gas the way that moths are to flames. They got to talk about it. Marianne Williamson brought her A game to the MSNBC Climate Fest. Cut number 9.
Moral, ethical considerations, that's not our job. Our job is short-term profit for the shareholders. With complete blinders on, don't talk to me about any other stakeholders. That is a virulent form of capitalism.
But it is the one that makes people a lot of money in this world.
Well, a very small amount of people are made money by that, and a very large, massive group of people suffer because of that. And that's why we need a revolution in our times.
All right, though, Marianne Williamson is a moron. Anyone who knows that 90% of the average Frenchman at the turn of the 19th century, from the 18th century to the 19th century, they used 90% of their income on bread. Capitalism is the greatest gift to humanity in the organizing of human activity and labor ever to be embraced. Adam Smith did it all. Hayek did it all. We produce more for more people. That's why you have wheelchair ramps and penicillin. It's why you've got the Salk Institute and Jonas Salk producing the Salk vaccine because of capitalism, producing money for R&D. It's why you're staying alive if you've got cancer and drugs. It's why you eat. It's why your supermarkets are open. Marianne Williamson is a moron. And I wish someone would just say, I know you've written a bunch of silly books that a bunch of silly people love, but you're a moron. We're taking you off the stage. How moronic is she? Cut number 12.
What is wrong with that? If something goes wrong with nuclear energy, I don't think people have really stopped to take in the horror. See, we need an integrated politics. We need to go beyond hard data. We need to go beyond just thinking about the facts. I want you to think about this with your hearts. Something goes wrong there. What are we even talking about?
Okay, let's stop for a second. I saw yesterday the courts in Japan dismissed the criminal trial against the Fukushima executives who were charged because they had a tsunami and an earthquake. Something went wrong in Japan. How many people died? Do you know? Yes, there was a release of radiation. Like the worst thing ever that could happen to a nuclear plant, an earthquake and a tsunami. And Chernobyl. That was a complete and utter disaster. How many people died? Energy is freedom. Marianne Williamson's a moron. Justin Trudeau at the MSNBC Climate Fest, cut number 13.
Afternoon, Mr. Trudeau. Teresa Wright from the Canadian Press. You said just a few minutes ago that you told us last night on the plane that of all of the different instances that you recalled, have you since been made aware or remembered of other instances, and if so, how many?
I think it is obvious that this is something that was deeply regrettable. I am wary of of being definitive about this, because the recent pictures that came out, I had not remembered. And I think the question is, how can you not remember that? The fact is, I didn't understand how hurtful this is to people who live with discrimination every single day.
Okay, so that wasn't the Climate Fest. I get it confused because it's just as boring, even though he's been lying about it for 30 years and he has not been honest with the Canadian people. And we got another video after that. I'm wary of saying how many times. We ought to run a pool. How many times did Justin Trudeau wear blackface? What's the over-under on that? Does Vegas have a line on that? Does Ladbrokes?
Half a dozen. It's got to be half a dozen.
Got to be over-under 6? Because we got 3 already. It seems like a shtick with Justin. We'll see if it sticks to Justin. Stay tuned. America, Tarzana Joe is next on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Citizens for Truth in Drug Pricing.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Joining me now is Tarzana Joe, the Hugh Hewitt Show poet of the week. He's always the poet of the week. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. And I don't know if Dwayne told you, but with an eye to your idea of Trump the musical, I've been working on Brexit the musical. Now, Dwayne has banned me from singing on the air, so we'll just tell you about two of the songs. One is called We Didn't Know What They Meant, sung by members of Parliament about the referendum, and the other by a man counseling patience, called When Georgie Takes the Throne. But if you can get somebody from Hillsdale's music department to contact me, we'll get this written up and scored for you. But thinking about Brexit, I've noticed that every decision, whether it's personal or political these days, seems to be right on the edge, a tough one to make, and that's what this poem's about. I'm criticized quite rightly for my failure to commit, appraising each decision as a 50-50 split, believing what they told us from those Ivy League salons, that really clever people always weigh the pros and cons. So for my indecision, I won't shoulder any blame, for increasingly the pros and cons weigh in about the same. In Israel, while winnowing the kernels from the chaff, voters in Jerusalem split their house in half. In Britain, where the BBC has pollsters on retainers, the kingdom is divided twixt leavers and remainers. In politics, the Democrats can't seem to choose their hero. All that they agree on is de Blasio's at zero. Giants fans are muddled on their optimal approach. Should they point the finger at the GM or the coach? How I long for yesterday, when every prince and peon, despite a world of differences, found things they could agree on. Everyone would rise and pledge allegiance to the state. Now even jokes and pronouns are subjects for debate. I searched for some proposal where there might be no dissent, but Resolve the Sky is Blue just polled at 51%. That's 50-50 by Tarzana Joe.
Joe, that is brilliant. Will that be posted at tarzanajoe.com?
Absolutely. And even some of Brexit the musical will be posted.
I'm looking forward to that. And if you have a poetry need in your life, send Joe an email, tarzanajoe@reagan.com. tarzanajoe@reagan.com. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everyone who's been listening to Bernie Sanders for so long. Bernie was at the MSNBC Climate Fest as well, and he was not going to be outdone by Marianne Williams or anyone else. Cut number 10.
But what I don't agree with you, Chris, on is whether or not we have seen Pearl Harbor. I think you've seen the Bahamas, you've seen Katrina, you've seen drought and floods all over the world. You see the migration of people. You are seeing it now. Climate change is not going to be one attack.
Sure, yeah.
It is attacks that are taking place, if you like, all over the world right now, impacting hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. So I think anybody who has eyes to see, anybody who believes in science, understands that the devastation is already taking place, maybe not as in a dramatic fashion as December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, but it is there all over the world.
All right, the Bernie campaign hit 1 million donors yesterday. 1 million people think this is Pearl Harbor. 1 million dummies. 1 million dummies. And that's a lot of dummies. I'm voting for Bernie, by the way, not giving him any money. I'm going to re-register in Virginia and vote for him because he is the clearest choice we could offer to Donald Trump. A choice, not an echo. Al Gore, by the way, we always have an Al Gore sighting. We saw him yesterday on MSNBC at the Snooze Fest. Cut number 17, Al Gore.
I like it a lot, and I'm very mindful.
Stop. Isn't that voice just amazing? Just takes you right back to the year 2000. Play it again, cut number 17.
I like it a lot, and I'm very mindful of the persistent sniping at it and the criticism of it. I like how it links environmental justice and the fight against inequality and emphasizes the jobs that are really and truly there. I mean, solar installer is the fastest growing job in the U.S. for the last 5 years. Has grown 6 times faster than average job growth. Second fastest growing job is wind turbine technician. We could retrofit buildings in every community. It also reminds me, I'm a good deal older than you, but it reminds me of something called a nuclear freeze.
You know, it sure does, and the nuclear freeze did not work, and had it worked, the Soviet Union would still be with us, Al Gore. Chris doesn't know that, but I do. Al Gore, almost the president on 9/11. Think about that, and then you know that God watches over this country even when he allows terrorists in to kill 3,000 of our beloved fellow citizens. Stay tuned, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. It's really remarkable that the Milwaukee Brewers are second place in the wild card in the National League with only 83 wins. The Indians are second place in the wild card in the American League with 90 wins. Just going to show that the National League only bats 8 people per side, and they give you an automatic out. It's just an easier team. Joining us to discuss not baseball, but the Iranian crisis is Mike Gallagher, Congressman extraordinaire from Wisconsin, but he's a Brewers fan. I just wanted to point out it's really not baseball.
You know, I thought since I was doing double duty this week that you might lay off Wisconsin sports, but that's noted, Hugh. Next time I agree to come on twice in 2 weeks, I'm going to insist on you praising my Brewers, who are down a critical player right now.
Don't even go there with the Indians' injury plague this year. We've even got Cookie Carrasco coming back with leukemia. We just lost to Jason Kipnis to the broken wrist. Franco has missed 20 games. I could go forever on that, but I want to talk to you about Robert O'Brien and the Iranian crisis. First of all, on the show this week, when you did your first incredibly difficult 10-minute segment this week. Double duty, I know it's putting a lot on you, Marine. So you're working 2 10-minute segments this week. That is like being back in the Marines, I think. Stateside duty, not when they're fighting a war, but stateside duty. Tell me a little bit. You predicted earlier this week that O'Brien would be a great choice, and then O'Brien is the choice. Why did you make that prediction? I wasn't being that bold.
Clearly, I underestimated my influence with Donald Trump, because I think it happened about an hour after our segment.
It did.
But listen, there's a variety of reasons. First and foremost, you and I know Robert well, and he's just a high-integrity human being. He is an absolute patriot. He's someone who will put the interests of the country always ahead of his own parochial or political interests. And he's just a thoroughly high-integrity human being. And you can't underestimate that, particularly when you're dealing with such a challenging array of issues. I think Robert has the sort of moral center to guide him and the entire National Security Council through very difficult issues. The second thing I'd say is that Robert O'Brien has, for years, prior to it being the new consensus position in Washington, D.C., been warning us about the threat posed by China. He is in the right place on the most important geopolitical issue of our time, and that's the fact that the fundamental and most important threat we face, long-term threat, is great power competition with China. And so he will continue the strong approach to China that has been started under the Trump administration. That's critical. And the third thing I say is, as you and I know well, Hugh, Robert he's a navalist. He understands the importance of sea power. He has been talking for years about the importance not only of rebuilding our military in general, but our Navy in particular, the importance of a 355-ship Navy, which I fear is sort of falling by the wayside. And so my hope is that Robert can re-inject the importance of rebuilding the Navy into the administration. And a final fun note, Hugh, I believe the first interview I ever did on your show prior to ever running for Congress was in studio in Irvine with Robert O'Brien. I remember being incredibly nervous and I think tongue-tied at times, but Robert helped me get through it. And so to see him ascend to this important position, I'm just so proud of him, and I wish him the best, and we'll be praying for him.
Now, you both served Governor Walker in the national security field when he was running for president. Had a very good pre-election season. Then, of course, Donald Trump took control of the primaries and won the nomination. But when you work with him in terms of preparing options for the governor on national security issues, what's it? Because the National Security Advisor is supposed to be a fair arbiter of views. He's supposed to make sure, especially the people who aren't in the room, have their views presented fairly. What do you think about that?
I agree. I think that sort of Scowcroftian model of the honest broker is the best model. Now we've had successful national security advisors who had a different model. Kissinger comes to mind, but I just think when you're dealing with principals, whether they're the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and all the other people that get a seat at that table, you have to do your best to present the president with a range of views and a set of options, and also foster productive debate. Eisenhower, who was famous for his attendance at his National Security Council meetings and the robustness of those discussions, had a great phrase. He used to say, at that table, there can be no non-concurrence through silence. In other words, you can't sit there, say nothing, and then a month later after the decision's been made, say, well, I told you so, when you didn't actually say anything. And so I describe Robert, when I tweeted about this, as a high-energy, low-ego individual, and I think that will serve him well in preparing a range of options to the president, because it's not about him at the end of the day. He just wants to make sure that we're considering every angle and doing everything possible to prepare the president to deal with difficult issues. He proved that in the Walker campaign, and I just think he has the right personality and background suited for this position.
Now let's talk about taking that general and applying it to the specific. Joe Dunford is quoted by the AP as saying, we're going to have a meeting today at the White House. The president is going to get an options list on Iran. Some of those options will involve force, some will not. And we have, against that background, a New Jersey man indicted on terror charges, allegedly scouted targets in New York City for Hezbollah. There's a lot riding here on what the president chooses to do vis-a-vis the Iranian attack on the Saudi facilities. Mike Pompeo said it happened, so I believe Mike Pompeo. What do you think the president ought to do, and what's a national security advisor's role with a situation like this in the sit room?
Well, if I were sitting there, what I would argue to the president as a foundational point is that doing nothing is actually the most escalatory option. In other words, I think there is a concern about needless action, certainly a concern about getting involved in another protracted war in the Middle East. I understand that concern, but I don't want that to serve as a straitjacket on our policy. And if we allow ourselves to be intimidated by the Iranian regime, I fear we'll get more aggression, as history shows, and we will get more escalation. So I would make that point. The second thing I would say is that we have an opportunity with our allies to use this latest dramatic escalation on the part of Iran as a way to convince them to get on board. Certainly, if nothing else, we should all agree that after an act of economic terrorism, Iran shouldn't be rewarded economically. In other words, if the French are still floating a $15 billion loan to the Iranians, that should evaporate immediately. And then, if I were in the role of the national security advisor, I would simply walk through the range of options ranked from low intensity and low risk to high intensity and high risk. So you start with increased sanctions. I think the president is already there. You can then go up to using cyber tools to disrupt their communications, and you could jam their broadcast signals. Cyber attacks could also have significant damaging effects on the Iranian economy. Going up a level from there, you could consider limited standoff strikes using long-range precision-guided missiles. You could also perhaps target their submarines. They have about 33 submarines that are in commission right now. They're not that advanced, but they do represent a threat to commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf. And if Iran continues to, for example, put limpet mines on commercial vessels, those submarines are fair game. So you could do a standoff strike that I think would not risk escalation to all-out war. Keep going up. Other options emerge. Maritime embargo, that requires a bit more intensity, certainly would be provocative. And you could go above that and start seizing Iranian commercial ships. And then I think you get into the high-range estimates and really the high-risk, high-intensity options. You could have more intense standoff strikes, and then you could impose, you could do a persistent strike campaign to destroy their nuclear program would be the highest intensity that you consider. But you lay these out for the president, you have everybody at the table debate it, and then ultimately the president's the one who decides.
Now, Mike Gallagher, they hit a Saudi Arabian oil facility with drones and with cruise missiles. If we don't do anything kinetic, they're likely, I believe, to target the UAE nuclear facility, which could cause extraordinary damage in that region. What about hitting Karg Island, which is basically a one-for-one exchange? You took out the Saudi Arabian oil production facility, we'll take out yours. Escalate it at your peril.
Well, if I'm remembering correctly, in the 80s, Reagan took out oil rig facilities, and he gave all the civilians there about 20 minutes to leave. And so there was a proportional response, and it did not escalate. We send a strong signal. So I certainly think that would be appropriate. The president does seem concerned about proportionality. However, I think we need to consider whether our response to the destruction of a $130 million drone by the Iranians a few months ago was not strong enough. In other words, in that response, which we reportedly responded with a cyber attack, we were very concerned about proportionality, and we had a response that maybe wasn't strong enough, and therefore we got more Iranian aggression. So while I am all for proportionality, I don't want it to hamstring us, and ultimately we do need to force the Iranians to back down. But certainly a target like that, which would be similarly an economic target, which wouldn't involve a lot of civilian casualties, is something that the president should consider, and I'm sure his advisors will put on the table as they consider how to respond.
Last question, Representative Gallagher. In a column yesterday for the Washington Post, I said about Robert O'Brien that a little-known aspect of his qualification is that he spent a long time mentoring the next generation of national security thinkers. I believe you among them. Why is that important? I think it's important. I explained to people it's a tradition in national security circles as well as military circles. Why does it matter?
Well, in two ways. One, when you get into a role, when you're the principal, I experience this on a small level now as a member of Congress, having gone from a staffer and a foreign policy professional to that. You have to, even if you have a background in these issues, you continually have to reach out to a wide range of people for help and support. And if those are people that you have mentored, those are people that are going to work with you, they're going to help you generate options, they're going to help challenge your thinking. And I think that's related, and that's the second issue I'd say. You need, in these positions, they test you significantly, and you need friends and allies. And it's not just to give you support, it's also people that are willing to push back on you when perhaps you're not headed in the right direction. And Robert has done a fantastic job of mentoring me in my career, and I hope that I can provide support to him and anyone else that's making very difficult decisions on behalf of the United States on the world stage at a time when we face increasing threats from China, from Russia, and certainly from the Iranian regime.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, thank you. Follow him on Twitter at Rep Gallagher. Knows what he's talking about over the weekend. As we see what happens with Iran, follow his Twitter feed. Follow me to drugpricingtruth.com. Drugpricingtruth.com is the website for Citizens for Truth and Drug Pricing, a great sponsor of this program. They are in the battle to make Big Pharma reform patent manipulation, and I am with them. Big Pharma took us to lunch in the deal with President Obama during Obamacare. They got themselves a sweetheart deal, and they have used strong lobbying, incredibly expensive lobbying, to manipulate the patent system out there, and the patent system is what is driving up the cost of drugs that have been around for almost 100 years, like insulin. There's no reason for insulin to cost this much, but to get it changed, we're going to need your help. Go to drugpricingtruth.com, drugpricingtruth.com, and send that link to 10 friends. While you're online, head over to relieffactor.com. If you're watching on Univision, there's the famous North Carolina blue and lime green bag. In it are little packets, which are easy to open, completely easy to swallow. I do it in the first hour. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, the 4 natural supplements that ought to be in everyone's system every single day, especially as you go into the weekend. If you're a weekend warrior, you're going to go out and train for the triathlon or the marathon this weekend, probably doing your last long run. If you're running the Marine Corps Marathon, the New York Times Marathon, you'll hurt a little bit on Sunday. Less so if you've been taking relieffactor.com. And if you're in the commute right now and you're wishing your neck didn't hurt, your back didn't hurt, something didn't hurt, you got to be taking relieffactor.com. The 4 natural ingredients that work with your body to provide temporary support for the temporary relief of minor aches and pains. Don't miss relieffactor.com. Thom Tillis, Senator from North Carolina, is next. Stay tuned.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. In breaking news, Bill de Blasio has ended his campaign that not many people knew to become president. Going back to New York, the dysfunctional city that he presides over. Good, finally. One thing that I know is that Thom Tillis needs to win his reelection bid in North Carolina if the Senate GOP and Mitch McConnell are going to retain their majority in the United States Senate. Thom Tillis website, THOMTILLIS.com, ThomTillis.com. Good morning, Senator. Great to have you back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning, Hugh. I'm sure both of de Blasio's supporters are disappointed about the announcement, but I think he made the right call.
Couple of devastated people out there. Senator, last time we talked, you told me you were on Armed Services Sea Power Subcommittee and that you chair it. Since that time, Robert O'Brien, my friend of a decade plus and former law partner, has been named the National Security Advisor. You got to be cheered. He's a navalist. He's been out there urging that the Pentagon take seriously Donald Trump's promise of a 355-ship Navy. What's your reaction to the O'Brien appointment?
I think it's a great appointment. Senator Burr, the senior senator in the state, are very pleased with it. You know, we also owe him a debt of gratitude because he was involved with the ultimate release of Pastor Brunson and his capacity with working on hostage negotiations, release negotiations. So he's got legal experience. He's got both in the government and the private sector. He served in the Army Reserves. He's just got, I think, a great resume. He's going to make a great NSA.
Now, tell me about the North Carolina profile on military bases. Of course, we know you got Fort Bragg down there, but I think you got a lot more than Fort Bragg. I think you got Cherry Point, right?
Well, we do. You know, we've got Camp Lejeune, which is home to about 45% of all the men and women in the Marine Corps. We've got Cherry Point, which is going to be one of the major depots for the Joint Strike Fighter, particularly the B variant, the vertical lift. But for other variants, we've got the New River. And then we can't forget, it's not in the DOD, but we've got the largest Coast Guard air station in the United States up in the Northeast at Elizabeth City, not to mention our National Guard and one of the most deployed National Guards in the country. We've got a great military tradition, which is why we are the fastest growing veterans population in the country, about to surpass California for veterans population.
You know, I got told that every retired Marine Corps general has it in their orders that they got to move to North Carolina. You got a lot of my buddy Mel Spees is down there, and he said basically everyone I served with in the Marine Corps shows up in North Carolina once they turn in their papers.
Well, they do. You know, we've got several commandants, former commandants down here. General Amos was actually chairing one of my service academy selections. Oniero. It's not just limited to the Marine Corps. We get a lot of men and women that come back, and they're coming back to the area not far from our military installations, Pinehurst, Parts East, out of their beach, and we welcome them because they're great Americans, and all the men and women, veterans who are coming to the state, we view it as a compliment as a state that gets veterans and military families right. We're doing everything we can to support them.
So, Senator Tillis, that leads me to they all know, and I know, and you know, a continuing resolution is a nightmare for the Pentagon, but it appears that's what we're stuck with for at least the next month. And I cannot communicate how disappointing this is because you did your work, the NDAD is done, and the Defense Appropriation Act should have been done. Is there any chance that can move quickly? Do the Democrats not realize how devastating this is for the military?
I think Chuck Schumer knows how devastating this is, and it just goes to show you the depth that he will go to play the political games that he does. There was an agreement that included the president on the budget caps that gave 5 people veto power on anything going outside of the parameters of that agreement, and he's basically welched on it, and he's putting our military readiness and our capabilities at risk. Our President Trump has done more to make sure that we're getting funding out of the Congress for men and women in military. We're at levels of readiness we haven't been for a while. Chuck Schumer owns responsibility if that starts going in the wrong direction.
And we're on the cusp of making a very important decision on Iran, and then we're in a continuing resolution about DOD. It is not even, to say it doesn't make any sense is an understatement. It is malevolent.
Oh, it is, Hugh. And you know what happens when we go into a continuing resolution. Many citizens will say, well, they're funding the government. But what happens through the whole of DOD is they have to put certain projects on hold because they don't know what would be in the next continuing resolution. So while we're trying to stay ahead of China and Russia and many of our adversaries in terms of capabilities, Chuck Schumer is basically saying, I'm going to put the American people at risk, men and women in uniform, for my own political purposes, versus giving them certainty, letting them invest and innovate, and to make sure that our men and women are capable, ready, and safe. He's putting that at risk, and Nancy Pelosi is a co-conspirator.
Very much so, and I hope when you go back to work this today on Friday, you let people know. Everybody knows what they're up to. Senator Tillis, always a pleasure. Remember, he's running for re-election. We need him to win that seat in North Carolina. ThomTillis.com. $5, $50, $100. It all helps Thom Tillis. ThomTillis.com. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back. Dean Matthew Spaulding, Dean of the brand new Stephen Emmy Van Andel Graduate School of Government of Hillsdale College's Kirby Center in Washington, D.C., joins us not to explain what that program is and who it's designed for, and I think they're going to get deluged with applications in the next hour of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 8 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 7 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 6 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Morning Glory, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, and that music means it's the Hillsdale Dialogue, the last radio hour of the week, every week, beginning in 2013, right through the present. And this is a very important week in the history of Hillsdale and Hillsdale in D.C. It is the week that the college expanded its Washington, D.C. presence to offer a graduate school and a master's in government degree inside the Beltway. Joining me to talk about the brand new Van Andel Graduate School of Government in Washington, D.C. is the dean of that school, Matt Spalding. Dean Spalding, first time I could call you that. I've known it was coming. I could finally say Dean Spalding, but I couldn't say it until today because of the soft launch. Welcome, congratulations. Tell people about the Van Andel Graduate School.
Well, thank you. This is a great thing for Hillsdale. This is a major extension of our presence and our mission. But I have to say, this is, I think, something significant for our country where it is right now in its future. Something lacking. It's markedly different. It's exciting. And I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be given the opportunity to be here and do this. And I think it's going to change things for the better. This is going to be a great, great school. Change how we think about politics, and we need it now in the life of this country more than ever. So this is a great day.
Let's talk about who this is intended to serve. There are graduate schools galore inside the Beltway. Most of them not very good. Most master's degrees a bit routine, a bit rote. This is anything but ordinary, and I believe it will become the credential du jour, the one you've got to have if you want to rise in D.C. What is it, and how is it different from everything else that is inside the Beltway?
Well, yeah, look, you're right, and I've been back here. I faced this dilemma when I was young, trying to decide how to continue my education. Graduate schools in Washington, D.C. are literally a dime a dozen. You throw a stick and you'll hit one. They're everywhere. But they're all really based on a smorgasbord approach to education. You take a dabble in this and dabble in that, get enough credits, and we'll give you a master's degree. And we think that's not only silly, but really misguided and waste in education. So what we're going to do and what we've designed is a master's degree program in D.C. for working professionals that are working during the day and taking classes in the evenings and on the weekend, as we're going to accommodate to their schedule. We don't like to accommodate. We're going to do that. But it's still going to be based on the Hillsdale philosophy that there are core fundamental things you need to know. And there'll be a core in this program that you'll take and you'll learn about the nature of politics and what it means to think, as opposed to merely accommodating yourself to how D.C. works, the modern administrative state, the bureaucracy, and we're not going to teach silly things like healthcare 101. You can learn that. That comes and goes. We're going to study old books and try to train the mind to think about politics, to think prudently in the way what a statesman needs to know to govern well. That's all.
Let me explain what happens in a typical D.C. graduate school. Can we play the Borg soundbite, please? This is from the famous Star Trek movie where Captain Kirk and crew confronted the evilest of all evil things, the Borg.
We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
That is what happened. A graduate school signs up in D.C. and they go into the Beltway Borg, Matthew Spalding.
Right. There's a massive sucking sound, and it's your intelligence being absorbed. Look, the academy, we know, we've talked many times about how the modern academy has gone its way into radical, crazy ideas, and so in many ways is a lot of our politics. Surprise, surprise. It's the same truth, and here in Washington, it's especially problematic because people come to Washington, they're interested in politics, they go to these schools, and these schools are actually teaching and strengthening exactly what the modern bureaucratic state is doing. So what you learn is how to accommodate to that in your way of thinking. So you learn modern theories of how modern government works.
That's the Beltway Borg. Yeah, the Beltway Board assumes continuing resolutions. It assumes deficits. It assumes that only Hill staff know how to make a law work. It assumes that the president can do A, B, and C, but not D, E, and F. It assumes that the Supreme Court has judicial review, which it does. I know since Marbury versus Madison, but it assumes that they can grant nationwide injunction. It assumes so much, Matt Spaulding.
That's right. That's right. And not only does it does it in many ways. The most immediate is the one you've just talked about, which is it assumes the way government currently works, which we're all familiar with. But the other thing it assumes, which is deeply destructive and intellectually deeply problematic, it assumes all the modern assumptions about human nature and the nature of history and politics that grow out of all the bad revolutionary thoughts of the course of the 20th century. It assumes all of that, which means it ignores, to our great detriment and to the detriment of free government, it ignores the deeper understandings of politics that you get going all the way back to the Greeks and the Romans and the serious thinkers of the past that informed the Washingtons and the Lincolns and the Churchills. It ignores all of that, which means we can't recover serious thinking and statesmanship until we get past it. So this is a huge barrier, a barrier. So the people who are interested in politics, if they learn politics that way, not only are they learning the status quo, but they're missing the boat. They're missing the forest for the trees. They're not learning about politics. They're not learning how to think.
Let me read two paragraphs from the press release, because I think this is important for the audience. Who is this for is always the first question about a graduate school. Let me tell you. And what does it cost is the second question. Who is it for? What does it cost? Students pursuing a degree from the Steve and Amy Van Andel Graduate School of Government will complete a total of 36 credit hours in 3 core areas: political thought and culture, American politics, and statecraft. To accommodate working professional schedules, classes will be held on evenings and weekends during fall, spring, and summer semesters. Significant scholarships are available, often up to full tuition. The program will take 2.5 to 3 years to complete. Students will have access to all Hillsdale College resources. The program is accredited by the Higher Learning Commission and licensed to operate in the District of Columbia by the Higher Education Licensure Commission. The formal inaugural class is slated to begin their classes in January of 2020, but the school will offer lectures and courses for a select pilot cohort in the fall of 2019. For more information, visit dc.hillsdale.edu or contact dcgradschool@hillsdale.edu. Now, Dean Spaulding, I went online looking for the application and couldn't find it. Have you posted an online application yet? Because you're going to get overwhelmed.
The application is online and ready to go.
So
I think it might have been, we probably filtered you out. Yeah, we have to be careful.
Tell us about the fact you've made it easy for professionals at work, Hill staffers, bureaucracy members, people who are working in think tanks, people who are working in media outlets to go to school and get serious about government.
Well, I mean, look, we have what is a fabulous and excellent graduate school in Hillsdale, Michigan. And anybody who's interested in getting a great graduate degree, especially if going into a PhD, I will be the first to send them there. It's a fabulous program. But it turns out, lo and behold, there are lots of people that come to Washington, D.C. for the right reasons, intending to do good things, and they're on their way to a great professional career. They're speech writing, they're in journalism, they're practicing law, they're working on the Hill. And they are not going to give up that career, which is very promising, but they want to continue their education. This is why there are all these graduate schools in Washington, D.C. They want it for a professional credential, which is very good and important, but they're looking for an alternative. My point is that right now, given the nature of the modern academy, but also something about our politics right now, there is no true alternative to the status quo. So you can take a course here or there, find a professor at some of these schools here or there, but there's no actual course and program that is 100% dedicated towards this kind of thinking for those kind of people.
And I want to underscore something that you said. A lot of students and a lot of young professionals, I'm thinking about being a 30-year-old lawyer in D.C. 30 years ago, 33 years, I'm 63. and having a law school debt to pay off. You don't want to take on more debt. You got to work. However, if you want more learning, the fact that often complete tuition is available here. I don't know Steve and Amy Van Andel, but my hat is off to them because they understood how to unlock the door that stands in front of so many people who want this kind of seriousness of purpose in their graduate degree. They just can't take on more debt.
No, that's right. So Steve and Amy Van Andel, they're fabulous people. Just had dinner last night with Steve Van Andel. Great man. Went to Hillsdale, and he knows what this means, and he knows why we have to do it. That's really important because we don't take your federal money. No federal money here. We've got to have scholarships.
We will come back and talk about that. Meanwhile, you might want to call your friends and neighbors around the District of Columbia or any young person in the United States who wants a graduate degree that matters, that will help them make a difference. I'll talk about more with Dean Matt Spalding. I love saying Dean Matt Spalding of the Hillsdale Van Andel Graduate School of Government in D.C. Stay tuned.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's the Hillsdale Dialogue, the last radio hour of the week, every single week on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Everything Hillsdale is at hillsdale.edu, but I'm really focused this morning on the new graduate school, the Steve and Amy Van Andel Graduate School of Government at Hillsdale College's Kirby Center. The dean of that graduate school, Matt Spalding, joins me. It's got a soft launch. They've got a few students there now, but it really gets going in January. And Dean Spalding, because people listening to radio, I always listen to radio. I'm always disappointed by hosts who do not spell out things. If you head over to the dc.hillsdale.edu site, dc.hillsdale.edu, and you look for the School of Government about, and they'll say admissions, and you'll find that you need an official transcript. You need 3 letters of application. You've got to complete the application form. There is a $50 application fee. A writing sample is required. A statement of interest is required. A resume, a CV if appropriate. And if the initial phase of application is successful, the applicant likely will be contacted for an interview. Now, they probably heard free or almost free. That means the subsidy is huge and their debt ought not to be an impediment to it. But they may not hear rigorous. And I want people to hear rigorous. What does rigorous mean?
It's going to be hard and rigorous and serious. So what we're combining here is we're bringing Hillsdale's academic standards to D.C. This is going to be a serious program. You're going to read fundamental documents, original documents. We're going straight to the source. This is not about reading secondary ideas and that kind of thing. We're going to go back and read some Aristotle and Cicero and Thucydides and Shakespeare.
Machiavelli, that will appeal to people. Machiavelli.
Hegel, Locke, it's all going to be there. We're going to do American politics, so we're going to study a lot about founding and up to Lincoln, a lot of Lincoln, and then statecraft, which means we'll get into some practical things. We're not going to ignore that at all. As you know, you'll be the first to know, what we need in our politics right now and what we need generally, and this is something Aristotle, going back to Aristotle, recognized, is we need to understand immediate things, particular things, circumstances. You got to know them if you're in politics. And people tend to pick those things up. But the real challenge here is how do you design your actions? How do you decide, how do you deliberate about those circumstances in light of something else? And that means we have to know something about our own regime and about principles. And that's got to be serious and rigorous. You can't do it by going to a conference or a weekend or a lecture. You've got to spend some serious time working through serious thinkers. And in particular, we believe you need to spend some serious time thinking through how a Churchill or a Lincoln or a Washington went about accomplishing their great deeds successfully, but they did so in light of those permanent and fundamental ideas that guided them. That's what we mean by statesmanship. This is not a fun, let's quote the founders up on Mount Rushmore. This is a serious inquiry into the nature of prudent decision-making in light of first principles.
It is not a trade school like law school. I've been teaching law school for 25 years, but because it's a trade school, even in con law, I can only spend 3 classes on how do we get here and what do we believe before I go to Marbury versus Madison. A brief history of nearly everything.
Right.
When Justice Gorsuch came to the Nixon Library last week, had a long conversation with Matt Spalding, the dean of Chapman University Law School, and I said Matt Spalding. It's not Matt Spalding. I can't think of his name right now. Yeah, it's John Eastman is no longer the dean. Matt Parlow. And Matt Parlow sat down with the justice, and he spent a lot of his 90 minutes talking about separation of powers, Matt Spalding. But that was a great introduction and why it so mattered. But 30 seconds, you can't do separation of powers in 90 minutes.
To fundamentally understand it, you can't. That's why, to go back to your earlier point about most graduate schools in Washington, D.C., they are actually trade schools. And what trade schools teach you is the immediate. Now, they oftentimes get certain parts of it right, and that's perfectly fine. Here's how Congress and the committee system currently works. But you got to do it in light of a deeper thing, and separation of powers comes from understanding of politics and human nature behind that. Why do we have the separation? What's the purpose and the good it serves?
Don't go anywhere, America. Dean Spalding will be right back with more on D.C., Hillsdale and D.C. Their new graduate school is open, taking applications, and we'll tell you how, why, when, and where after the break. Stay with us.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I'm very, very excited about the opening of the Steve and Amy Van Andel Graduate School of Government at Hillsdale College's Kirby Center. I've told you the specifics. I want to go over them again. Takes you between 2.5, 3 years to get your master's in government. You will be studying under the guidance of Dean Matthew Spalding, my guest for this Hillsdale dialogue. DCandHillsdale.com is what, or on Twitter, DC and Hillsdale is what you want to follow, and just go to hillsdale.edu and find the graduate program. What I want to focus on here is a very practical aspect. I'm the lawyer in the room, right? You're the academic. I'm the lawyer in the room. What days and times are classes typically offered? Classes are typically offered in the evening, Monday through Friday, right? 6:30 to 9
classes
p.m.
are going to be the evenings, which means they're after hours. We'll start at around 6:30 or so after work, run into the evenings. The main courses, if you're just taking one course, we'll meet once a week. And the other aspect of this, which you'll find of interest to you, is we're also going to have a combination of 3-credit normal courses and 1 credit with a Friday evening dinner and a Saturday. And you do that twice, and that's a 1-credit course. And that's going to allow a lot of other people, including from our home campus, to teach. So, for instance, Dr. Arnn is going to teach a course. R.J. Festrito is going to teach a course. Paul Ray, the great classical historian on campus, is going to teach a course. We've got a lot of things lined up in a program designed to allow for those kinds of additional faculty from the main campus, as well as some pretty high profile and interesting adjunct professors who are going to be teaching the program as well.
Now, each student will likely take 1 to 3 courses in a semester. The schedule depends on what is offered in a given semester and the pace at which the student wants to finish the degree. A minimum of 1 credit per semester is required. And I want to speak to the people out there who are saying to themselves, free, wow, almost free, that's great. It's not free. You have to work your rear end off, Dean. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. This is going to be the most unique program in Washington, D.C., but I would expect it to probably be the hardest because it's the most serious. We're going to do serious things, and we're looking for serious students who are really committed. This is not, hey, I just go grab a degree and be done with it. I'm looking for most serious people who are doing serious things in their lives and really want to study how to help save this country.
I really would not be surprised if you found every Supreme Court law clerk who was staying in town after they finished their year at the court to want to come and spend 3 years with you getting a serious founding in political theory, because that is the introduction. A year of clerkship is allegedly the highest academic experience for a lawyer, and it is. Right, but that doesn't mean it's the highest academic experience. Well, I mean,
No, that's right.
Or the chief counsel on judiciary, or someone working at the State Department or Department of Defense. A lot of military, I assume, will want to do this. They will have a little bit more problem because they'll have a 2-year tour of duty, but I'm sure you'll work with them. Who are your initial students? What do they look like?
Oh, so we are our initial. This is our kind of our soft launch student. We have a nice mix. That was by intention. We have some people from the Hill, so a Senate staffer and a House staffer, someone from a think tank. We have a lawyer who's in the administration doing religious liberty. We have the head of an institute. We have someone in the corporate world who does government relations. The point here is we're looking for the best people, really smart, and are doing the right things, young professionals in a wide array of areas who want to shape political and public questions. But we're looking for the ones that are the most serious that we're going to invest in. And we're going to work them really hard on the most fundamental things in a very deep conversation through seminars and make them into better human beings. That's our objective.
Now, what I want to warn people is they will have to give up their fun receptions. They're going to have to give up their softball league, and they're going to have to do it for 3 years. And they're going to have to give up, their church group. They can go on the weekends. But the idea is if you do this at 30 or 25, you spend 3 years, then you have 30 to 40 years of serious purposeness ahead of you. I mean, you're not going to be a silly person. You're just inevitable. You'll be a happy person. You'll have good humor, as almost everyone except Arn does at the Hillsdale College campus. But you won't be without a foundation. And so many people arrive with ambition, which is good. Ambition is what did Hamilton say? It's the highest end of the noblest minds. But ambition untethered to actual learning is not a good thing.
No, that's right. And so one of the advantages we have in Washington, D.C. is Washington attracts and really kind of self-filters people that come here. They do have the right qualities in terms of the practical qualities needed to be successful. Many of them have had a decent education, but not a great education. They need to deepen it in a serious way and think about it, prepare for their futures. I'll give you an example. When Winston Churchill was a young man, he wasn't the best student. When he was in the military, he spent hours preparing himself, including reading the public record of debates in Parliament, to teach himself how to debate the important questions, and he was preparing himself. He didn't know what for. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he spent time preparing himself as a young man for his own future. That's how it works. Lincoln educated himself largely, but he studied Euclid very carefully to prepare himself to be a good lawyer and a good thinker. That's the model that we want to emulate here. It's not merely learning the doctrines or the party positions on a list of 20 questions. You got to learn how to think. And if you can think well about the most important things, then in the particular circumstances, you can apply those things and use the virtue of prudence, as Aristotle teaches us, to know what to do in particular conditions. That's what Lincoln and Churchill and Washington did. But you need to have some time, some rigorous time, some serious time to think about this seriously. And in Washington, D.C., you've got to set that time aside. We will work in terms of our scheduling. We're going to help make it. We're going to make it financially possible. We're going to do everything we can to create the conditions. But you've got to commit your mind to doing this kind of a rigorous thing if you want to become that kind of person.
And it's best to do that when you are young. I had occasion to discuss recently with Dr. Henry Kissinger, the guy who taught me foreign affairs, Stanley Hoffman, an old friend of his, and they became political opponents. He taught the Melian Dialogue in the first class I ever had on foreign affairs. The Melian Dialogue still remained. The representatives of Corinth saying to Sparta, while you were at home, the Athenians are constantly abroad. The weapons change, but the dilemmas facing statesmen don't change, Matt Spalding.
That's right, and we will teach Thucydides. You're exactly right. The permanent questions about the nature of politics, how to think about questions of justice, how to think about the good, and what those things are, does not change. That's a permanent conversation. When you read those great books, you realize they're actually having a conversation which you need to participate in. Circumstance change. 1776, 1860, 1941, and today. Today, we're in the midst of a broad crisis about what to do. But the ideas and how to think about it doesn't change, and you need to know that if you're then going to apply those principles under the circumstance.
Now, I got to ask you, Dean Spalding, when I studied under Straussians at Harvard many years ago, Harvey Mansfield would never slow down for the lawyers in the room, right? I got like 10% of what he was saying. So how ready does someone have to be? And I'm serious about this. How ready do they have to be? What kind of preparation do they have to bring to the table? What if they're a doctor, but they're also at NIH? What if they are a physicist over at Carter Rock, working for my old friend who's retired now, Mark Vandroff? What if they're a young Marine Corps lieutenant who has been learning the techniques of war? Are they ready to do this graduate program?
Well, whether they're ready or not, we'll see. But they've got to be ready to do some serious work. But having said that, you're right, and you're on to something there, which is some of the best people here have many very important things which are a component of a serious education about these questions. Because there's an important element of experience that goes into teaching prudence and how to do these things. It's not merely an academic exercise. So part of the virtue, I think, of this school is precisely to combine serious and a rigorous study of ideas, reading great books, studying the history of these great moments and these great statesmen with people that are actually engaged in the public, engaged in public life and their work. Because what they will actually bring something to the table which is also very important, which is the practical ability to be focused on something and be thinking about it and getting things done. I mean, an important aspect of statesmanship is deliberation and command and decision, and people in those kinds of positions who are already engaged and well on their career are in a very good spot to now add to that these other things to learn. But this is going to be a serious program. You can't just jump in and not expect to have to write and do a lot of reading and participate in a seminar and be engaged and pressed by some, pretty rigorous professors who have read these things and want to push you through them and guide you.
Last question for this segment. Do you have to know Latin, Greek? Do you have to learn Latin, Greek? It's not a divinity school, but to what extent do you need to be able to read in the original?
You don't. If you want to go out to the main campus, they'll make you do that, which is great. You don't here because we're more practical in the immediate sense. You're going to read some of that translation, and knowing a little Latin will help, but you don't need to. But we know we need to learn those ideas because those ideas are crucially important. But we're talking about people that are in the middle of things. They're in the midst of what's going on in the world right now. We want to get them and deepen their thinking so they can continue their careers. That's the objective here with this school. They're going to continue their careers with a deepened understanding of the principles so they can go forward and continue to their work, but also shape the country back to its principles.
Hey, how big will the first full class in January be, Matt? I know you've got a soft launch right now, but how many will be in a full class?
There's already a lot of interest in applications, but we'll probably be looking at something in the range of 15, 20. Taking people in every semester, though, that's going to build pretty rapidly. We're adding faculty space. We're going to see what the market's going to bear. We're pretty ambitious, as you know. We want to do a lot to turn and shape the country. But we need to keep it serious and rigorous to the level that meets our standards. So we'll see how that goes in terms of applications and people. But we mean to do a lot and have a permanent presence and a permanent shape on the current thinking about the future of democracy and self-government and these ideas in the city.
One more segment on the network effects, which is a very practical way of looking at this. When we come back with Dean Matthew Spalding, Dean of the new Steve and Amy Van Andel Graduate School of Government at Hillsdale College's Kirby Center. I repeat, don't let your debt stand in the way. Almost full financial tuition is available for everyone. Often full tuition is available for everyone who gets in. Go and look it up. I'll be right back with Dean Spalding. Time for me to remind you, though, if you're going to be one of those students over at the Van Andel Graduate School of Government, you want to get relieffactor.com because you're going to climb up and down the steps at the Kirby Center. and like 1 million steps to get into the Kirby Center. I kid you not. If you're a young weekend warrior and you're running marathons and stuff like that, you're going to just kill yourself. If you're Christina out there and you're listening right now, you're going to kill yourself going up down those steps. This is perfect for you, Christina, by the way. If you're one of those clerks who are working their hands off over at the court and you think you're going to kill yourself on these steps, that's why you need relieffactor.com. Yes, they have an elevator as well. It's a completely accessible building. But if you're one of those people that hate to climb steps because your knees bark at you, your ankles hurt, try relieffactor.com. I tell you about it 3 times a day. I take it every morning in the first hour, as does the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, as does Prager and Gallagher, as does Larry Elder and Seb Gorka, everyone in the Salem family. Relieffactor.com. We've all embraced it. We all take it. We all believe in it. And we all urge you to get the starter pack at $19.95. You will thank me. Join the tens of thousands of people who do and come right back after the break on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Very special edition of the Hillsdale Dialogue this week. Dean Matthew Spalding, Dean of the brand new Steve and Amy Van Andel Graduate School of Government at Hillsdale College's Kirby Center. To find out about it, go to at go to hillsdale.edu, look for the graduate school, and they will tell you all about it. Or go back and listen to this over at hughforhillsdale.com. Dean Spalding, small classes, 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years to get the master's degree, the old books, the important debates, the preparation to be free of the Borg that is the Beltway. I do want to mention, though, network effects. These are real when you go to the right graduate school. Would you tell people about what you expect the network effects of this graduate school to be?
Look, there's a need to form a cadre of people who are serious about these questions. And doing so and being involved in that network of people, I think, will stem from serious study. Let me give you the great historical example in this country is the progressive movement. How did they change this country? They did through by teaching ideas that went out and changed the shape and direction of the country. But they had an intellectual bond, a bond of friendship developed in things like courses and reading books together. That's what we want to create in a good way that points us back to those founding ideas. I mean, the founders themselves, how many people, when we think about it, we talk about the founders, it was not a large group of people, but they had studied certain things in common. They knew the Greeks and the Romans. They knew their British history. They knew the debate about rights and what that meant. And they knew about their country and the circumstances and the particulars. Having that network of people and being involved in it and engaged in it is crucially important for yourself, for your own betterment, but it's also going to be crucially important to activate these ideas and move these ideas in our politics. So I think that's an important component of this that oftentimes we forget. Most of these graduate schools, again, they treat you like some individual. It's a smorgasbord. You get a little cafeteria, and then you're gone, and then they ask you for money. We're actually looking to shape people, to form them for their own souls, but also for the types of citizens, of engaged, thoughtful citizens in the political life of our nation that we really need right now to preserve self-government. That's what's motivating us back to our original Articles of Association in 1844. We've been doing this for 175 years. This is an extension of that for the good of those deep ideas, but also for our country.
And if you want to, I re-emphasize this, because a lot of people are carrying student debt around. Tuition assistance up to full scholarship often available. It's for serious people. They make you work hard. You read the old books. You get very smart. You get network effects. But debt ought not to stand in your way. What it will cost you is the time that you would otherwise be spending watching Downton Abbey or the NFL. And that is worth giving up for 3 to 4 years.
Absolutely.
In order to get what you need.
The classical analogy of politics is the idea of a ship on an ocean. You know, the captain of the ship, he tacks and moves and goes different directions, and that's what politics is about day to day. But you got to be guided by a North Star, so you know where you're going, so you can get back on course. What I don't understand is if you're going to be involved in politics and be interested in what goes on in a place like Washington, D.C., how can you operate without a North Star? What's the point? Why are you here? And you need to learn that. You need to spend some serious time contemplating it, thinking about it, and seeing how other great statesmen were guided by the North Star. That's what we want to do, and that's how this is designed. It is designed to help as a practical matter. You mentioned the funding. We don't take any government funding, so you can't bring us your federal loans. You can't come here with your federal money and get it forgiven. We're going to make it competitive by having scholarships and funding, and that's how Hillsdale operates. And we're going to compete toe to toe in this market. We want to have a better education in this market, and we're doing so. We'll create the conditions to do so, but we're doing so for the most serious reasons that go back to what Hillsdale stands for.
And I want to add, Matt,
most serious people to join us in that.
I've attended seminars at Hillsdale, and even if you're bone weary when you walk in, the energy of a genuinely educational 3 hours is infectious, and it completely energizes you. If you're a member of these small courses taught by the best professors in the land, you walk out just feeling like that was 3 hours of purpose. Last minute to you, Dean Spalding.
Look, I think we're in a great moment in our history. There are some immediate reasons why we need to go back to this and think these things through. our core principles of our nation, the Declaration, the permanent ideas behind our regime are being questioned. We're being overwhelmed by a modern bureaucratic state, the administrative state, all the things you talk about, we talk about, but you can't really change those things if you don't deeply understand them. And you can only deeply understand by spending some time reading books and studying these questions. And that's what we want to do. And if we can do that in a way that informs people, that can change this country and revive self-government, we've done something great, and we've done something good for our country, and it's going to be good for all those people that are involved in it. And that's what we want to do.
The Steve and Amy Van Andel Graduate School of Government accepting applications for January. Head there now at dc.hillsdale.edu. dc.hillsdale.edu. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, General Simo. I will all be right back here on Monday on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.